What's up, everyone? Taiki here, and welcome to episode 24 of the Crypto Market Wizards podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kain, live here in Singapore. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Yeah.
So, how's the Token 2049 week been?
It's been very different for me this year because, we're going through this token sale. And so I've just had like 10 hours of meetings every single day for the last 4 days. So
yeah. And you were telling me you had to like explain everything all over again because people don't fully understand what's going on.
Yeah, we've definitely made it difficult for ourselves. I think, when you change the meta, it makes it hard because people, are used to the current meta. And so, that's been an interesting challenge to try and walk everyone through why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, you're definitely like a creator of metas, right? I think you kind of created yield farming. People called you the father of modern agriculture back in the day. So we'll talk all about all that later. But I think, one thing that's missing in the space is hearing about the stories behind the founders and the builders, at least in crypto. So today I just wanted to talk first about, I guess, your coming of age, your story. Awesome. So while I was doing my research, I saw that, your father, Kain Warwick, was an Australian tennis Grand Slam champion. So what was it like growing up when your father was competing at the highest level?
I think, in the early days, probably until I was like 6 or 7, we traveled around a lot with him. Until I was in school in whatever, grade 3 or something like that, we would go to a lot of tournaments. We'd go to Wimbledon every year. And so that experience, you're around very famous athletes and it's I think not a normal experience, right? To be traveling to different cities all the time. Tennis players have a hard life, right? Like they're on the road 30 plus weeks a year. So it was definitely not a normal life, I would say.
Got it. And I guess it was a pretty competitive environment, right? Like your father was just always training, and your brother Kieran is also a founder in crypto. What was your relationship like with your brother, just traveling all around?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's three brothers that I have.
Three brothers.
Yeah, so the three of them actually were the founders of Luvium. Kieran's the one who's kind of I guess the face of the project, but Aaron and Grant, who are the two middle brothers, were both founders of that project as well. So it was kind of like them versus me sort of thing.
Right.
But Aaron and I are 2 years apart, and then there's like a 6-year gap, and then Grant and Kieran came, and so there was kind of like the pre-younger brother period, and then the post-younger brother period. And by that time, my dad had retired, and so we were living in Florida, and I think that 4 boys is just super chaotic.
Yeah.
And I think I'm sure there's families where there's 4 boys and it's maybe reasonable, but that was not the 4 boys that we had.
Yeah. Were you like the funniest, the loudest? What was the dynamic like?
I mean, I was the eldest, so I was the one that was, at least from my perspective, in charge of everyone, right? Uh-huh. And for my 2 youngest brothers, we sort of helped raise them. So I would help put them to bed and do all that sort of stuff and help around the house, especially because my mother was basically a single parent while my dad was traveling.
Right.
And even after he retired, he was still traveling a lot with satellite players and elite players, coaching them because he became a coach. So even after he wasn't playing, he was still touring a lot.
I see. So I guess when your father was traveling, I guess that dynamic, did it help you become more independent because maybe you were like the father or like the elderly figure to your younger brothers?
Yeah, I think so. From a pretty young age, I sort of felt like, we were definitely latchkey kids. We would roam around our neighborhood in Florida where we lived. And it was a gated community, so, it felt safe, although I guess it was the 80s, so probably was less safe than the 80s in Florida. I don't know if there was any place that was really safe,
right.
but we would just disappear for 7 hours, even as 7, 8, 9-year-olds, right? We'd go out into the wilderness, running around hunting snakes and all kinds of, weird stuff. And, I've got a daughter who's 7, and if she was out of the house for 10 minutes, my wife would be freaking out, right? Yeah. So, I think it was just a very different time. So, yeah, I was very independent, I think, from a young age because of that. So, it was something that sort of helped me, I think, later when you're trying to wrangle a team or coordinate people. Each of my brothers is very different for very different reasons. And so, I would need to approach all three of them in different ways to get them to do what I wanted.
Right. And I guess while you were growing up, I saw that you were pursuing a bachelor's degree in genetics, but you dropped out 18 months in. But, before we get into that part of the story, like, what did you want to do growing up?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really remember. I don't really remember having any particular idea of what I wanted to do. I suppose, I was a swimmer growing up. That was more of my focus than tennis. I kind of switched to tennis later when I was like maybe 10 or 12. And so, I probably had some sense that like I would be an athlete or something like that, but it wasn't until quite a bit later, probably when I was like 16 or 17, that I actually got to the point I didn't really like school. I wasn't a huge fan of school. So I think later in my life, around like 16, 17, I sort of worked out how to do school and how to do well. But it took a while. So, an academic career was not really on the cards most of my life.
Got it. So I guess you went to college. Why did you choose genetics?
It's a good question. I think I did a course in high school. You had these like elective courses, and they had a weird one, which was forensic science. And so I took this like 10-week forensic science course, and I thought that was really cool. And then, obviously a big part of forensics is, being able to do DNA collection. And so it seemed kind of like a good idea. But I got to university and organic chemistry was just like the death of me.
Yeah.
I think I got like a 42 in my first organic chemistry exam. And I was like, maybe this is not my thing.
Yeah. No, I went to school in Berkeley, and like OChem is everyone's like worst class. Like I had friends that like was crying studying for finals because they just felt like they were going to fail and they were going to disappoint their parents or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's really brutal. It's funny. I think back to that time, I thought I was, I thought I was mature or whatever. Like if I had to do organic chemistry now, I would approach it in a much more systematic way. Like I would come up with a process for how to do it. And I think the people who did well had already worked that out at 18, right? Like how to actually like kind of brute force your way through a hard problem. But I didn't have that skill then. I would say now I would probably do better on an organic chemistry test than I would have at 18, 19.
Yeah, but I guess you were maybe more wild with your approach, but
I was legit. I was like, I think there's like a little bit of a curse of, being able to coast through things. And, I was definitely able to coast through, especially, probably one of the, you sort of asked about like formative experiences. And I think one of the most formative experiences for me was my family was very successful. My dad was a successful tennis player. The interesting thing though was in the 80s, it was probably the early 90s that prize money really flipped. And this is the same in a lot of professional sports, right? If you go and talk to someone who is a really successful football player or soccer player from the 70s and 80s, they did well. They were like upper middle class, successful person, but they're not LeBron, right? Like that, and now today, if you're a top 200 tennis player, like I don't want to say it's like generational wealth, but like you're extremely wealthy, right? Like, the prize money that's around today, we didn't have that. And so my dad, I think his total career prize money was like $1 million, which was, very good back then. He won, as you said, a bunch of Grand Slam doubles events. And, but it wasn't enough that when he retired, we were able to kind of maintain that same level of lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And so there was a big switch. Right. And Kieran particularly, he's the youngest, that he never got the good side of that, right? You know, growing up, traveling, staying in nice hotels, going to Wimbledon, all of that stuff. Like he got the hard side of that, and there was a part of him that was aware of the fact that like there was this good times, the good time. He was like, I didn't get the good times.
It's like a bull market, bear market.
Yeah, it's like you guys got this bull market, and it's still bad for everyone in the bear market, right? You're in the bear market, and you're like, there was a bull market, and the people who have never seen a bull market are like, sure, there was, right? So I think that was one of the biggest things for me, is realizing how important money is in terms of your experience of life, right? Your ability to do things. Like we couldn't travel in the way that we did when my dad was playing, and so that really had an impact on me, and colored a lot of things. But I sort of coasted through all of high school because I was in a really crappy high school. The high school that I went to was really bad, right? It was just a public high school, and there were like 2 kids that were academic, right? And like everyone was like looked at them weirdly. And then I was able to get a scholarship, tennis scholarship, for my last 2 years of high school in a much better school. Still not a great school, but it was much better. Like it was 10x where I was before. And so prior to that, I'd sort of been coasting, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh wow, there's smart kids here. Like I need to actually do well if I'm going to, be able to stand out. And so I had to kind of work it out, but it was very late, and probably a bit too late for my academic career.
Yeah. No, I feel like looking back at my life as well, there's like these little moments or big moments that kind of change the trajectory. I also used to go to a crappy middle school, high school, or middle school. And then like my mom passed away. I had to move in with my uncle and change school systems. And the old middle school was really janky, not really competitive. And then the new middle school, there was a lot of competitive Asian kids. And I'm like, all right, like, I need to beat these guys. Yeah. And then I was like, all right, like I need to really study, I need to work hard. And it doesn't feel weird, or it feels kind of weird saying that, her death led to a better life for me. But
I think, again, like coasting is dangerous, right? Like if you're in an environment where you don't have to work that hard, if you're a reasonably smart person and you can just sort of coast, I think it can really kill you. It can really impact your motivation. Whereas, if you're in a competitive environment and you have a natural competitiveness, all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's a game here, right? I've got to try and win this, and I think it can bring out the best in people. Not everyone, but some people really respond to that, and I definitely did. I was like, oh, okay, I was really behind these people. They'd been in a good school for 12 years at that point, and I was like, what are we doing here? So
yeah. And I guess maybe that gave you a chip on your shoulder, and you started all these entrepreneurial projects. But before I get into the companies you started, I had this question. You were part of a band, right? Called the Lie Society. Yeah. So first of all, why did you call it the Lie Society?
That's a good question. I think we originally had a different name. It was like the Audubon Society or something like that. And we had this like weird bird logo, and people were like, it's not edgy enough. And so then I think, especially at that time, this is like the early 2000s, there was this view that like society was, crumbling or something. There was a very angsty wave, George Bush had got in, and I think people were like, the society's not telling us the truth. And so we were like, what's a more edgy thing than this like weird bird society? And so we were like, the Lie Society is punchier, and it's also a little bit ambiguous, like what could it mean, right? Like what, how will people interpret it? So that was kind of the genesis for that name.
Okay. And how long were you a part of this band?
So I started playing guitar when I was 12. Okay. One of the things that I'm incredibly thankful for with my dad is, we grew up listening to music. He loves music. And so there was always music on in the house. And he gave me a guitar when I was like 12. And again, I didn't really push myself to become good at it, right? I found it a bit annoying. I didn't want to practice. I probably prefer to play video games or whatever. But he really pushed me. And a friend of mine who's one of my closest friends was playing tennis with him and was a really good guitarist. And he was like, I'll give this guy lessons. He's a couple years older than me. He's like, I'll give you free lessons if you teach my son guitar.
Yeah.
And he was like, he's like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm just a good guitarist. I'm not a guitar teacher. But it actually really worked because, he became a close friend of mine and we started writing songs together. And then he moved away to Boston. And so eventually I was like, all right, I'm going to move to Boston and we'll start this band.
Oh, wow. So you literally moved to Boston to start this thing?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was in the Bay Area in San Jose, and I was in a relationship. It broke up, and I was like, what is my next step here? Do I go back to Sydney? Do I move somewhere else, go to London? Like, I had a bunch of different options. And I was like, if I don't do this now, it's not going to happen. And so he was in a grad program in Suffolk. And I was like, all right, I'm in, let's do this. And so I moved there, and it was great. It was one of the most incredibly fun times of my life. And I met my wife there as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Success story.
Yeah.
What was like the biggest show that you've done?
The biggest show, we opened for a couple of like national touring acts towards the end. And I think we had like a 1,500 person show in one of the bigger venues was like our biggest kind of breakout thing. We never really we toured a little bit. We went down to New York and like Philadelphia and through Rhode Island and did like a 10 show tour, but it was still like opening for local bands, right? We never really broke out into anything, meaningfully successful, but we were able to get a couple of good gigs, and we were just getting to the point where we probably would have been able to get a little bit more momentum. But unfortunately, he got moved to a final year of his grad program in Austin. And I was like, I'm not going to Texas. Like, I'm out. And so the band broke up, unfortunately.
I see. And how old are you when this happened?
I moved there when I was 25. So it was like 25 to 29. Okay. So I think I was just about, I was actually 24, just turning 25 when I moved there. And I left in 2010. So I would have been just turning 30.
Got it. So, I mean, you dedicated 5 years to this band. It disbanded. Like, what's next?
Yeah, exactly. So I went to another friend of mine, and I was, I think we were talking about this yesterday on our walk with Vitalik, but I was like, all right, I need to go back. I'd done a startup prior to that. I'd moved to Seattle when I dropped out of school after organic chemistry wrecked me. And so I went and did this startup, and I loved it. I was like, okay, like I get this. And, I'd always been interested in tech, interested in startups, but I don't think it had occurred to me like to actually go and do a startup, as in like a tech startup. I'd had my own businesses, like I had this racket restringing business. So, I'd been entrepreneurial in like a small business sort of sense, but not in the sense of like, let me go and build some scalable tech platform like that. Right. That hadn't occurred to me. And so this was my first experience with that. And it was awesome. And so I was like, all right, I want to try that again. I've done the band thing. It was amazing. I loved it. It was, as I said, it was one of the most fun times of my life. But I was sort of thinking like there's got to be some next thing. And so I reached out to a friend of mine and decided to move back to Sydney and start a company with him. We had a couple of options. One of them, we were going to try and basically roll out like an artificial intelligence trading platform. I'd been day trading for a while at that point, and I was like, I feel like the market's less efficient than people think it is. And I think that there are patterns here. And if you were going to run some kind of like quant AI program, and this is before LLMs, obviously, and AI had been something that I'd been following for a long time. And he was like, I don't think that's the thing. I don't think we can do it. And I was like, okay, cool. So we ended up doing this very retail focused degen like auction platform, which I think also honestly informed a lot of the crypto stuff that I did later. So it probably was better. But yeah, that was what, got me back to Australia basically in 2010. And I've been back in Sydney now for like 14 years.
Got it. So you were way too early into AI.
No, it was like in the AI winter, right? And so I think AI had kind of stalled. And so we might have jumped in and started doing stuff and found that actually the tech wasn't ready. Like, but thankfully we didn't even try. We were like, actually, this is not a thing. So.
Got it. So I guess transitioning your life into crypto, how did you discover Bitcoin?
I'd been reading Slashdot since like 1996 or something like that, right? That was like my main sort of, I guess, connectivity to tech. I built computers. I did a bunch of like little side businesses, helping people set up Wi-Fi networks when Wi-Fi first became a thing. So I'd go around to people's houses and set up APs and stuff as a way of making some extra money, especially when I was in high school and the first couple of years of uni. And so, I just was interested in tech. And I remember there was that like 2011, Bitcoin core had been upgraded. And it's funny because like, I think people would occasionally comment on something to do with crypto, but the Slashdot community was very insular. Like there was like certain tech that was okay, certain tech that was not okay. And I think crypto was one of those ones where it was like kind of seen as a bit like scam. And it's weird because like they deeply cared about, encryption and there was like throughout the late 90s, like every second story was about the government trying to like crush encryption and stuff. But somehow crypto, applied cryptography was like not okay. Anyway, so I think finally, even after a lot of like discussion in the comments and stuff, there was a post that was actually about Bitcoin. It was one of the first ones. And it was like, I want to say mid 2011 or something like that. And I saw it and honestly, I didn't get it. Mm-hmm. Like I read it and I was like, whatever. Right. Yeah. And so then it was 2012. At that point, our startup had failed, and I went and got a job, and I was running a computer store, and for whatever reason, obviously something popped up on my radar, and I was like, oh yeah, this Bitcoin thing. And so I set up CG Miner on my home theater PC, and I couldn't get it running. I think like I couldn't get the drivers running or something. I can't remember what it was. So this is like probably mid 2012. And I was also in the process of starting a new startup at that point. So we had this online retail startup. I left that computer store that I was running and went and did this online retail startup. And one of the issues we had was chargebacks. And I was like, I think this Bitcoin thing could be quite useful there. If people paid in Bitcoin, we don't have chargebacks. We don't need to worry about fraud. If you sell someone a MacBook, there's like the fraud, people who have not been in online retail do not realize how crazy and adversarial it is, right? It's very similar to crypto. There are people that are like constantly trying to like break your system so that they can get you to send an iPhone or send a MacBook or whatever, and then they just go and resell it, right? There's just scammers that are like, and they're incredibly good at it. And so chargebacks were this huge issue. And so I was like, what if we enable Bitcoin? So we set up Coinbase Commerce. And it's funny, for the longest time, I thought that we had set it up and no one ever used it. And actually, I recently, like in the last couple of years, found a message from Kieran, who's my youngest brother, who was running this online retail startup with me, being like, someone paid in Bitcoin. So someone definitely did. And I've talked to the Coinbase team. Apparently, the early version of Coinbase Commerce was non-custodial. The version now, and so like I guess there's private keys somewhere. Like I've lost some Bitcoin. I don't even know how much it was actually. Like it could have been like 0.01 BTC or something like that. I certainly hope it's not like some
100.
Yeah, I mean at that point, this was 2013. So at that point, BTC was like a few $100s, I would say, and we were selling stuff sometimes for like $2,000-3,000. Right. So I hope that it wasn't like 10 BTC or something. But anyway, there's some Bitcoin in a Coinbase Commerce instance somewhere that's bricked, unfortunately. But that was why I sort of came into crypto as like a BTC maxi. I was like, this payment use case, right? A peer-to-peer electronic cash system is useful. Like this makes sense, right? And unfortunately, it's what caused me to, I think, fade Ethereum a little bit. Like I really didn't get Ethereum when I first heard about it in whenever it was 2015 or something like that. I was like, smart contracts. It wasn't until the DAO that I was like, okay, and I think again, I'm the type of person I need to sort of see a practical application of the thing to grok it. At least if it's something that's like outside of my normal experience, right? And so I've definitely mid-curved a lot of stuff in crypto over the years because of that.
Trust me, I know. I I am the definition of a mid curve. But according to a previous interview, you were saying that you're a Bitcoin maxi, and then I think you had, your daughter was born.
Yeah.
And then you had a lot more time in your hands.
Yeah.
And then you were finally like, okay, I'll look into this ETH and maker stuff. So like, what was like your light bulb moment that ETH is very interesting?
There's a guy, and this week has been too brutal, and so I can't remember his name off the top of my head for some reason. But he was writing about crypto. He's also a fiction author as well, and so I think I knew him from some of his fiction writing. I want to say it's Daniel something, and I stumbled across his blog posts, and he was writing about smart contracts and what they could do. And at that point, I'd been kind of smart contract pilled, right? Like I bought tokens in the DAO. I was watching, the DAO hack go down. I remember Griff on this live stream. Like this is my most vivid memory of like early crypto. I think even, Bitcoin or whatever, is this crazy Griff guy, right? He's runs Gibbeth now. Basically like live streaming the DAO hack. And like I was like, these people are insane. But I was like, I'm here for it. Like, like it was like so intense. This like amazing dramatic. He was like, and then we tried to do this, and then this happened, and this, and it like Lefteris was doing this, and it was crazy. I was like, this is just madness, right? But I was super interested because clearly people were not just excited about it, but like deeply engaged in the outcomes, right? Like deeply concerned about the outcomes. And to me, that was sort of a light bulb moment of like, this is real, right? But I didn't really have anything to build. I was building a different startup. That startup was like a payment gateway. We did a bunch of deals with the crypto exchanges in Australia to let them onboard people, but I was very focused on this payment use case still, and didn't really have any need to build smart contracts, right? And it wasn't until I took paternity leave and was looking into all of the smart contracts, and I think it was a blog post by this guy talking about stable coins where I was like, whoa, okay. Like stable coins are actually the thing. And at that point I was like, wow, Bitcoin as a payment method is actually so dumb. Like why would you use a volatile thing, right? And that really kind of flipped me into this mindset of like, okay, stable coins. I think stable coins are going to be the thing. And then obviously through 2017 Basis and a bunch of big stablecoin projects launched. Maker was getting close to actually deploying on mainnet, and there felt like there was this wave of kind of stablecoin awareness of like how powerful this technology would be. It's crypto, so it took a while to actually deliver, but I think today like everyone gets how powerful stablecoins are.
Right. So I feel like the common theme throughout your story is you kind of get curious into something and then you just take action. You're like, all right, I'm just going to build this because I'm interested in it.
Yeah.
So I guess what led you to do the entire ICO, right? For Havven. And just the entire experience there, the story.
So my initial design for Havven was centralized. Right, which is funny actually now that I think about it, because my initial design for Infinex was also centralized. So there's obviously a centralization maxi in me somewhere that's like struggling to get out, right? And I have to like tamp down that kind of desire to like optimize for the experience. But so I looked at ICOs and I was participating in ICOs. I did a bunch of ICOs in 2016, and I was like, this is the best thing that's ever been invented. Like legit, like I was like, this is maybe the most powerful thing the world has ever seen, right? And there's trade-offs for sure, right? ICOs, we had a lot of fraud. There's a lot of nonsense, a lot of stuff that was well-meaning but still went to zero, right? There's a lot of leakage of value in the ICO era, but there are things that exist today that, but for ICOs, would not exist. Like you just could not raise for them. And I honestly even put Ethereum in that category. Like I don't think if Vitalik had turned up at that moment, maybe later, right? Maybe with more traction or whatever, but at that moment, funding the Ethereum ICO via BTC, I think was maybe one of the only viable paths out there. Like, who knows? We're going to run 1,000 simulations. Maybe, he goes and raises from Andreessen and it's all fine. But in terms of the outcome, like, I think that so much of what we have in the industry today was dependent on that being an ICO and having that technology to do that. And so I was like, ICO pilled. I was like, this is amazing. And one of the reasons why I didn't mid-curve ICOs is I had been in a market that was really hard to raise. Like, it was really hard to raise money in Australia at that time. The VC environment there was terrible. And so we'd been trying to raise money for Blue Shift, and it was super hard. And did a bunch of VC meetings, and they're basically private equity firms, they wanted, 10 years of cash flow, right? And I'm like, bro, this is like, you're supposed to be a VC. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah. And so I think ICOs for me were just so obvious. Like, it was impossible to mid-curve it. I was like, all right, this is amazing. And so I was like, if I believe that this is such a good thing, the only way for me to really deeply understand the dynamic of it is to do an ICO myself. And so I had this idea of a stable coin, and I was like, I don't think I could do an ICO for this centralized thing. I need to actually lean into a decentralized platform. And so I re-looked at the mechanism, and I basically spent like 6 months kind of redesigning the mechanism such that, it was decentralized. And I was like, all right, now I feel like this is something I can actually take out to the market. Like, a decentralized, scalable stablecoin payment network to me was like, that will land. People will be excited about that.
Got it. And I think in 2017, you raised $30 million-ish for the ICO. How euphoric were you when you saw those numbers just trickling?
Yeah, it's funny. So Jordan, who's like my co-founder at Synthetix, he was helping me with Blue Shift at the time, and I was like, let's go over here and do this thing. He sort of tells this story of like how I can't settle on something for like even like 10 minutes, right? Like, I just refuse to celebrate wins. I'll be like, okay, cool, that's done, let's move on. And on the day of the ICO, it finished. And I was like, wow, okay, like, that's actually done. And then I was like, all right, now, and he was like, stop. He was like, stop and like go home for a few hours and just like enjoy this. And so it really forced me to be like, wow, after however many years, maybe 15 years as an entrepreneur, trying to raise money, trying to get to a point where I felt like I had the funds to actually do something really impactful. I had those funds. I'd raised the money. And so it was an incredible day. I was like, okay, like, this worked. We were able to do it. And I was so excited to get started and be like, all right, we're going to build this thing. It's going to be amazing. And then obviously the bear market really hit, and it became very challenging. And there were some dark moments at the end of 2018 because of that.
Yeah. What were some of those dark moments, or let's say some most memorable moments, I guess, of the bear market? And how did you keep pushing, right? How did you still believe and continue to build?
I think it's interesting as someone in crypto who's building, because it's one of the few industries, maybe AI is like this, right? One of the few industries where like your colleagues are doing other things. Like, the people that you're really close with are like building other startups, right? But it's in the same industry. So we're all going in the same direction, but, Stanny's building Aave, right? And so I became close with a lot of the early DeFi founders, and there's like this shared experience of like you're doing stuff together. But I think that it was also, this PvP game a little bit as well, right? Because you're not just building a startup, but you're also kind of trading your own PA as well, right? And so it's like, I've got my own ETH and Bitcoin that I'm trying to balance and trade whilst also managing this treasury to keep this, startup alive. It's a very weird dynamic. Like, there's a lot of things about being a crypto startup founder that are very odd compared to normal startups. And so I think that my personal funds, I traded them much worse even than like, we managed the Synthetix treasury. We tried to be more conservative with the Synthetix treasury. I basically got to a point, I remember it was my daughter's birthday at the end of 2018, and it was the day where ETH nuked like under $100, right?
Double-digit shitcoin. Yeah.
Yeah, Arthur Hayes, thanks. Thank you, sir. And I was like, maybe this is over. Like that was a moment where I was like, we can't go under 100. Like surely we can't go under 100. And I was like, maybe this was all a fantasy. Like maybe this is not real.
It's
right?
a dream.
Like, it was a dream, right? Like I was like, or a nightmare or something, right? And I was like, wow, how did we get here? Like how did we get here? But I at that point I was all in stables, and I had, a little bit of my stack left, right? It was probably like 90% down from where it had been, going into even like the end of 2017. And so I was like, all right, I need to like, what am I doing? Like, what if this is over? Like, what are we doing? Right. And that was a dark moment. I remember everyone's like celebrating my daughter's birthday, and I'm kind of like wandering around in like a haze, being like, oh my God, the world's burning. All right. Like, can't you guys see this? It was like the meme of like, no one realizes the world's on fire.
Yeah, no one realizes I'm down bad.
We're all dead. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that was probably one of the darkest moments, I think.
Yeah. Surely there were moments where you considered quitting, right?
It's funny. I actually didn't. And there's another moment. I didn't consider quitting, but I did consider that it might be over. Right.
Okay.
And I remember sitting in Feb of 2019, and we'd, at that point, like we bottomed out in early Jan. Right. And, but still our treasury had like less than 6 months of runway. Right. And I remember sitting there with Jordan, and he was like, look, if we do this and this and this and this and this, we can probably extend our runway out to the end of this year, right? And I remember just looking straight at him and being like, if we do that, we're dead. I'm going to plow this thing into the ground. Like we're going to throw everything at it over the next 3 months. And if we crash and burn, so be it, right? And that was when we were just about to kick off the token redesign, the rebrand, all of that stuff. And so we did all of that stuff. And we accelerated our burn. Like we went and got like extra people. We hired people, and I was like, and he was just like, "You're just going faster into the ground, right?" And then at the last moment, we were able to just pull out and get out of that death spiral. And still to this day, he's like, I remember that conversation, and he was like, how did I get attached to this absolute lunatic? Like, who would think, like, instead of preserving runway, we're going to accelerate our burn rate into the ground, and just, I was like, if it's over, it's over. Yeah. Like, if this is really over and crypto's dead, then it's dead. And we don't have control of that, right? All we have control of is our own execution inside of that macro environment. And so I'm not going to leave anything on the table. We're going to do this. If we preserve a year of runway and crypto's over, then it's over anyway, right? So let's do it. And luckily, 3 months was just enough time to be able to like really, we went hard. I think we hired like 4 people and just went, all right, let's go all in.
Got it. And I guess all your hard work was rewarded with DeFi Summer.
It was, yeah. It was a while later though. That was like 18 months later that DeFi Summer happened, right?
Yeah, but I guess, do you have any favorite memories of that time, the good times? You keep working, no one cares, and now everything is working,
it's funny. You talked about like having a chip on your shoulder, and I definitely do, and I still do to this day, right? And I've been thinking about this week with Infinex, right? Because everything's going really well. We're really happy. It's been very hard. It's been hard to get people to understand what we're doing. We're not building more infra. We're actually taking the infra that's been built and using it, which, like, I don't know how you could mid-curve that, but people are somehow doing it, right? A lot of people get it, but some people are just like, why not, like, just go and build another L2? And it's like, no, we need to actually utilize this tech, right? So it's going very well, but I think one of the things that happened with Synthetix after we kind of disproved all of the doubters, right, and you were able to build everything out, is I kind of ran out of that fire of like feeling the need to kind of show everyone, right? Everyone's faces got ripped off with Synthetix. There were so many people that faded Synthetix. Even in 2019, we had so many meetings with people, and they're like, yeah, like, it's gone from 10 cents to 20 cents. Like, I think you guys are topped out. Like, it's over.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And I would just file them away. And I'm like, you and you and you, like, you'll like, and I know what it feels like to miss something, right? You know, you're like, I think that thing's done. And then you turn around and it's done a 50x and you're like, oh, like the visceral pain of that, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, I want you to feel that, guy. I want you to feel how that feels. And then we sort of got to the point where it was like, we've done it. Like, we've done all this stuff. But I've kind of been rebuilding that Rolodex of like people who are fading Infinex. And I'm like, okay, all right. Yeah, there's another name, right?
Yeah,
They're like, I just think that, you know, this is going to be a really hard thing to do. And I'm like, everything's a really hard thing to do. That's not a good reason to fade this, right? And so my level of like fuel of like, you know, the chip on my shoulder of needing to prove to people that they're wrong, that fuel meter is like topped out now. I'm feeling very, very good about the fact that there's a lot of faces that I'm ready to rip off.
Nice. No, that's great to hear. I think I've noticed or observed that kind of mindset for a lot of DeFi founders. I think Stani also.
Stani has it, like, it's so deep in him.
Yeah. Even Rune. I think Rune from Maker, he burned out like last bull market. I think took like a 1-year hiatus.
Yeah.
And then I think last year he just said, you know what, like, time to take over, and he's just like doing things.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely good to hear. But I do want to talk about DeFi. I mean, it's been 4 years since DeFi summer. You know, what are your thoughts on where DeFi is at right now? But before you answer, I do want to give some perspective. In 2019, the DeFi TVL was under $1 billion, and now we're near 100.
Yeah.
So that's amazing, but it feels like the sentiment isn't that great right now. It's getting better, but
it's the curse of Degen Spartan, really.
Yeah.
He cursed us all. But I think it's, you know, it's not a curse, right? Like he was right. He saw that this was coming. And I think what he saw that a lot of us refused to see, and, you know, I know him quite well, right? Like, you know, I've spoken to him like many times over that Synthetix journey, right? And he has a very mercenary mindset. He's, you know, you have missionaries and mercenaries. He's mercenary, right? And he was never in it for the ideology. Like, Degen Spartan was like, I'm here because I see what's happening and I'm going to play this game and I'm going to do really well out of it. But he never got attached to the narrative, right? He never got attached. And that's why he was able to see early that this was going to hit a brick wall, right? And I think what I see today that he saw so long ago in DeFi summer is that the incentives for DeFi builders at the time were to build for other enthusiasts, right? Other people who deeply cared about tech, other people who deeply cared about decentralization, who were trying to you know, be maximally decentralized. And so what happened is we all were responding, pardon me, we were all responding to the incentives at the time. We responded to them and got richly rewarded for it, but we then ran out of enthusiasts. And you know, that happened in like 2021. Right? We just saturated the market for DeFi enthusiasts, right? And, you know, in a normal market, you would have said, well, that would have kind of petered out and you know, nothing would have come of it because you just didn't have scale, right? But DeFi is weird in that, you know, a few thousand people with a ton of ETH can really move the dial, right? And so the whole thing got huge. Everyone did really well. And we were trained that this is the incentive that you should follow, right? And I think he saw through this and was like, this doesn't scale. Like, you just can't keep going after enthusiasts. And we genuinely, whether we explicitly believed it or implicitly believed it, I think in my case, I explicitly believed it. And I've said some crazy things on Twitter about this, where I'm like, it's good that the UX is bad. It's good that wallet signing is bad because everyone needs to learn this so that they can get better at life, right? Which is like, just what? Like, and so we had this view that we were going to build more enthusiasts. We're going to go and get normies and we're going to train them to care about the things that we care about. And that is just insane. Like, that was never going to work. But you can imagine you're doing that. More enthusiasts are turning up. you're, doing really well. The financial incentives are all there. And you're like, this works. This is a good strategy, right? And then we just hit a brick wall. And when we hit that brick wall, he was like, this is going to be 3 years of pain until either the market changes or you guys change. And I think that finally I've seen the light, and I'm like, okay, we have to take what we built and make it accessible. And that's not a contrarian take by any stretch. It's just that our version of making it accessible that we've been doing for the last 3 years is so dumb. It's just so dumb, and it will never work. What we thought was making it accessible was not making it accessible, right? Because it was constrained by these things of like maximally decentralized, maximally censorship resistant. We're trying to do all this stuff. And with Infinex, I'm like, no. We have maximally decentralized solutions over here. We have thin clients and dApps and wallets and all of that stuff. What we need to do is take the tech and wrap it in something that's accessible, that can actually compete credibly with the Binance, right? And if we can do that, that's your DeFi renaissance. If we take all of the things we built, the scalability of L2s, all of the amazing stuff that's happening on Solana, we take all of that and we put that in front of a Binance audience, those people are going to lose their minds. It's going to be better than anything they've ever seen, but we can't expect them to come to us. We need to go and meet them where they are.
Got it. No, that's really inspiring. I can feel the passion and the belief just radiating from your body right now.
Like I'm so bought in. It's crazy. I'm like, and there's people who are like, yeah, sure, like whatever. Yeah. And I'm like, no. Like this was very similar to in the early DeFi days. They were like I talked to so many people that were just like, yeah, I don't know, like this yield farming stuff, and I'm not sure that it's going to work. And again, like there are downsides to yield farming, but that bootstrapping phase that allowed us to get to critical mass in the enthusiast community. If you don't have yield farming, that doesn't happen. Like that was the coordination mechanism that allowed us to scale up to that level. The next level is going to be 50x larger.
Got it. Yeah, and I think I really respect you because you're pretty critical of like what's or maybe not too critical, but you're pretty critical of, I guess, like what's not going well in the Ethereum ecosystem. We had you on the Study Labs podcast. That kind of, started this whole discussion. And then finally, Vitalik was willing to meet some of us to at least talk about DeFi. So obviously we met him yesterday. We went to like the botanical gardens, walked around, had some, healthy lunch or healthy breakfast. But like, what did that mean to you?
It meant a lot. And I think, I love Vitalik, right? Like he's an incredible person. But I'm not the type of person who will give someone a pass, right? Like if you're doing the wrong thing, even if 90% of what you're doing is right, if you're doing something that's 10% wrong, I'm going to call it out, right? And I think that the thing that Vitalik has just absolutely fucked up completely over the last 6 years is not engaging with DeFi founders, right? And I get his reasoning. I get that he's like, DeFi will be fine, right? And he's right. Like he was right. DeFi didn't need Vitalik's help, right? None of the DeFi founders needed Vitalik's help, but just because you don't need something doesn't mean that you don't want it. And I think that lack of support that the EF and Vitalik gave to DeFi founders is personally painful, right? Like, why does Vitalik not care about what I'm building? Why does he care about some weird, nonsensical, messaging platform, right? And I'm building like, this lending platform that has 20 bill of TVL, right? If I'm standing, I'm like, what am I doing wrong here? Like, why am I not getting, any credit for this? And I think that has been and again, you're talking about people who are founders who have chips on their shoulder, right? Like, they have something to prove. And it's like, okay, but like Vitalik doesn't care about what I'm doing. The guy who built the chain that has enabled me to do this thinks that what I'm doing is dumb. There's no way that's not going to feel bad, right? Like that's just going to feel bad. And so, I think that I said that to Vitalik very clearly yesterday. And I think that it resonated with him, and I think that he got it. And I hope that he sort of takes action from that. It's easy to come and meet us, and it was meaningful. Like he spent genuine time, he engaged with us. He had some opinions about some of the challenges that we're dealing with right now, and I think that's really important. But I also want to see some like long-term commitment to that, right? Like I'm not dumb enough to be psyops by like one meeting and be like, yep, job done, Vitalik loves us, move on, right? Like I want to see some actual meaningful change from the EF and Vitalik in terms of DeFi support.
Yeah, and I think you were telling him about Infinex, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'll check it out." I don't even think he knew about Infinex, right?
Oh, he definitely didn't. But I can't hold that against Vitalik. There's a lot of people that don't know about Infinex, right? So, he doesn't even follow me on Twitter, right? So I don't know how he would have. Okay. Yeah, I know, right? So I don't even know how he would have heard of it necessarily. But and like, okay, fine, Infinex. Like, I hope that he's heard that like Aave's going to Solana. He heard yesterday because I said it, right? And there was a moment where I think he was a little bit like, okay, like, you're losing the hearts and minds here, right? I was at ECC and Raj made time to like catch up with me and talk to me about Infinex and understand it and ask some questions. And they have a very different mindset. They're not trying to support the things that would otherwise die, right, on Solana. And I think also they have the luxury of not worrying about that because Ethereum does that, right? The maximally decentralized, crazy moonshot theoretical things, Ethereum is supporting that. The Ethereum community supports it. And so Solana has the ability of just focusing on go-to-market and consumer use cases and all of these things. And that's a huge advantage to not have to worry about that other stuff.
Got it. So I think we have roughly 15 minutes left.
Okay.
And I just want to pivot the conversation to, I guess, life advice. I don't know. You seem like you have a lot of experience. I'm sure the majority of my viewers probably younger than you. So I guess throughout your, decade or years of entrepreneurship, do you have any life advice for people that want to make it? It doesn't have to be about trading or building or anything, but what's something you've learned in like, let's say the past 10, 20 years, that you think you would give advice to your younger self, let's say? Yeah,
I think I've said this a few times, but it remains, nothing has changed my mind on this, right? The most important thing that you can have as a founder is conviction, right? And even not as a founder, even as someone who is trying to participate in a new space. Even if you just want to be involved in the space, right? You might not want to be a founder. You might just want to get a job in crypto, right? And contribute to a startup or something. Not everyone has to be a founder. Having conviction is the most critical resource, right? Now, what does that mean? It means that you need to have cultivated some belief that is independent of external sources in yourself, right? It can't be reliant on external factors. Mm-hmm. Like if I need Taiki to tell me that it's going to be okay, that ETH is not going to zero, what happens if you have a crisis of conviction yourself?
Yeah.
Do I fall apart? Right? Like, no, like, in fact, what would happen if you turned up and you were like, I think ETH is going to zero? I'd be like, let's go and have lunch and we'll talk about it because it's going to be fine. Right.
Yeah.
So I've cultivated a conviction about many different things, right? And in the space, and many different reasons why I think that that what we're doing makes sense and why I think it's going to be impactful. Now, some of those things turn out to be wrong, right? But sometimes you need conviction in something to get you started, or you need conviction to at that moment in time, right? And so a lot of the things that I had conviction about in DeFi have been invalidated, right? And I've had to rebuild new ideas and new convictions. The underlying conviction that a decentralized permissionless platform will be able to outcompete a centralized service that requires intermediaries, that's never wavered for me. Like that's just obvious to me, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's so deeply ingrained in me. I'll take that to my grave. You can't take that conviction away from me. How that is expressed should we build things in a maximally decentralized way, or should we have compromises so that we can meet the user where they are? Those are sort of tactical convictions, right? And so my tactical conviction has shifted over time. Like, we did this, we proved that maximally decentralized things could work, but they don't scale. And so now we've got to prove that they can scale. And so we need to pivot a little bit. I need to pivot, and I'm in the process of pivoting so that I can actually prove that. Now, I've got a lot of conviction in that. The world is a bit more skeptical, right? The world is like, no, we've been doing this thing, it's good. Even if I was to talk to Stanny, I think Stanny would say like, I'm not 100% sure about this, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's a bit of a contrarian take right now to say that we don't need to be censorship resistant, right? We need to be non-custodial, but those are two different things, right? And if we thread that needle in the right way, we can take down Binance. Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that I have conviction about is that the current equilibrium is unstable. This idea that a decentralized ecosystem that is predicated on not having counterparties and not having intermediaries is going to have all of its transactions happen inside a centralized database that is a giant counterparty and intermediary of all these transactions is insane. Now, we needed that to be the case for the last decade for reasons. We didn't have the technology to take it down. And if we had said, no, we won't do that, we wouldn't have got to scale. Right? In the same way that DeFi needed to be maximally decentralized to get to scale, it needed to attract enthusiasts to get to scale. We now need to invert this, right? And so crypto needed centralized exchanges to get to where it is. DeFi needed DeFi, decentralization maxis to get to where it needed to be. Now we need to flip it. We need to go over there and take some of the things that they've been using against us and use it against them. Right. And this equilibrium of everything happens inside of CZ's database is unstable. It will collapse. The question is, what is the thing that if you poke into it causes it to collapse, right? And what replaces it? My view is that there are a number of teams that have kind of worked this out. I think we're at Infinex ahead of most of them in how we're thinking about it. And I think that I've really thought deeply about this over the last year, and I feel like I've got a path through here. And that's the goal. Destabilize this current equilibrium and replace it with a new, more stable equilibrium, which is all of the crypto transactions happen on chain without intermediaries, which should be the most consensus view that you could possibly have, but it's not. It's not. People are not acting like that as the consensus view. They're acting like that as a contrarian view because this is the world we live in, CZ's database. We have to get off that.
Yeah, no, I love it. I feel like every founder needs some sense of like insanity / delusion to like really just believe in something.
Yeah.
I feel like the industry or people in the industry are getting jaded. Even Vitalik told me that he was getting jaded sometimes. I think we all need to believe in something. We need to have something that we can look at and be like, okay, like that's working. Like I'm bullish. I'm going to use that. Instead of, let's say, CZ's database, which is my
yeah. Here's the thing, right? Like, my goal is to provide that. Like, genuinely, my goal is to provide that. To provide a new, like, I am still a decentralization maxi at heart, right? But I'm also a pragmatic person. And so my view is that, you want someone who has the ideology, right? That is coming from that ideological place, right? But is willing to make compromises. And this was Synthetix. We made a bunch of compromises in the early days of Synthetix. It was not maximally decentralized, right? We made compromises to get to scale, and we built a whole bunch of things and changed a whole bunch of meta to make it okay for people to do things that were slightly centralized to get to where they needed to be. And now we have much more robust governance. Like the large, and look, DeFi governance is not amazing. And I think that there's a lot of work that needs to go into it, but it is far better than it was when we started. It is, you cannot convince me that it is not better. It might be slower and it might be more frustrating, but it is better. It is more capture resistant than the governance that we started with back in those early days, right? And so, if someone is going to take down Binance, you don't want that someone to be the person who's going to replace one centralized thing with another centralized thing. You want it to be someone who has the ethos of, yes, I'm going to be pragmatic about how we approach this. This is bad. We have to replace this. If we replace it with something that's perfect, we'll never get there. We have to replace it with something that is better and work our way towards that and let the market, once you break that equilibrium, then the market can find its way through this.
Yeah.
And so, my goal is to build something that people can be excited about again, because all of the stuff that we've built over the last 7 years is incredibly exciting, but we can't show it to the world. The world's like, you're idiots. This is dumb.
Yeah,
but it's not dumb. It's amazing. And so if we build something that lets them access it, their minds will be blown at the things that they can do. We just can't get them there yet. And so we've got to get them there. And that's why I'm so excited and passionate about this.
Yeah. There's not much that I can show my grandma in crypto and be like, I'm proud of this,
Yeah.
nowadays. And I feel like after this conversation, I was thinking to myself, yeah, like this guy's never leaving crypto. And one of my friends told me, it's like, Taiki, like you're never going to walk away from crypto. It's like, you're fucked. So I had this question for you. Do you think it's ever possible for you to walk away from crypto?
I don't think so. And again, this comes from conviction, right? Why would I walk away from, I was just a little too young to drop out of school and go to Silicon Valley in 1996, right? If I'd been 4 years older, I would have done that. That's where I would have gone, right? And I just missed that wave. And I was like, what if there's no new wave? What if there's no new enabling technology? And so it was one of the reasons why I was so interested in AI and followed AI research for so long, but it just never got to a point where I felt like I could build something with it. And when I finally understood what Ethereum was and what it could do, I was like, this is the wave. This is the thing that's going to change the world in the way that the internet did. And it's going to be hard and messy. And, we're going to end up in some bad places and some good things will happen, some bad, it's never going to be perfect, right? It's not a utopia, but this thing will change the world. And it still will. It's in the process of doing it, right? And yeah, of course, there's moments where you're like, Webvan closes down. You're like, is the internet dumb? Like, were we idiots, right?
Mm-hmm.
The market says yes. Like the market collapses and says, yes, you were all idiots. It was not real, right? And it's like, well, no, it was real and it was fine. It just takes time. It takes time to change the world. It would be insane if it didn't. It would be crazy. Like the world resists change very, very powerfully for reasons, right? Like if we could just change the world every 20 seconds with a wave of our hand, it would be chaos, right? So the world has a level of kind of inertia to change, and it takes time. But this thing is changing the world. It is actually working, and the point that we end up in 10 years' time is going to be better than the status quo when we started. And you cannot take that conviction away from me.
Got it. And one final question I have for you is, I think yesterday on our walk, you told me that you're now 2 years sober. You stopped just drinking alcohol. How has that changed your life?
Not just alcohol, drugs as well, right?
Okay.
So, I was a drug addict for basically my whole life, right? Different drugs, different times, different things. I was high functioning. So I would never have called myself a drug addict. I would have said, I like drugs. I'm a drug person. I like to go out and party and I like to take MDMA or ketamine or whatever, right? But I was always able to work and push through it. So, I would go out and party and then I would get up the next day and I would work hard and, drink some coffee and just push through. And it never occurred to me from the time I was like 15 when I started doing drugs till 2 years ago that there was any problem with that. Like it was just a part of my life. That was what I chose.
Yeah.
And I got to a point where it was starting to break down and I didn't have enough sort of structure in my life to force me to be a high functioning drug addict, right? I became a low functioning drug addict because that's all I was optimizing for drug addiction and not for anything else, right? And basically my family was like, you need to stop this. And so I was very lucky. I found someone in my life who was like, you need to go to this place. Like, this is the place for you. You're fucked. And I was like, okay, all right, fine, I'll do it. To placate everyone. Like, everyone's worried about me, sure. And I turned up at this place, and it's a 6-week program. And I was 5 weeks in, and I was like, okay, this has been a good break. But obviously, as soon as I get out, I'm going to drink again, right?
Yeah.
Which is just insanity, right? Like you're in a rehab program for 5 weeks, and I was like, yeah, like I'm going to have a glass of wine as soon as I get out of here on the plane, right? And it took literally 6 weeks for me to actually get to the point where I was like, I don't think I can drink or do drugs again. And someone asked me, they're like, you like never drink? And I was like, yeah, I never drink. And I was like, I have a choice between sanity and drinking, and I choose sanity. And the interesting thing as well now, being sober for 2 years, this is the first time I've done a startup sober. And it's hard in different ways, right? One of the nice things about being a drug addict is you can numb stress. Just take a pill, have a drink, numbs it, right? When I don't have that coping mechanism now, I have to have other coping mechanisms. But the other interesting thing is I feel things differently. I didn't used to feel things, and so I have a better intuition, I would say, about my own behavior and about the way that people are responding to things and, about my team than I ever had in any other startup. And I go to bed in one state of mind, and I wake up in the same state of mind, right? And throughout the day, my state of mind is the same. It's not shifting constantly on this bed of drugs and alcohol. And so, that I think is a really powerful tool that I have now in this new startup journey that I've never had in any other startup. And so, I'm pretty bullish on it. I think it feels pretty good.
Yeah, you're bullish on sobriety.
I'm bullish on sobriety, yeah. And it's funny, there was a wave in SF, I think like 4 or 5 years ago, where everyone was getting sober. They're like, alcohol's bad, we're getting sober. And if there's anything that I look back on today that was indicative of how much of an alcoholic and drug addict I was, it was my reaction to that. My reaction to that on Twitter was like, you people are monsters. What is wrong with you? You're so lame. Why would you not drink? But it was the addict in me reacting viscerally to this idea that there might be a problem with drinking, right? And I look back on that now and I'm like, that is an insane reaction. Like, how could someone react to someone halfway across the world deciding not to drink and be angry at them? Like, there's something off there. And so, yeah, I'm not running around proselytizing for people to stop drinking. I just do my own thing. But, it is a very powerful, force in my life right now.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Yeah, I also have a friend who hasn't been drinking for like a year. And now he said he's more intentional with his time. Where previously he would just go to parties because, I'll drink, have fun. But now he's like, well, if I'm not going to drink, then I'm not going to have fun at that party. So what's the point? And then he's now way more productive with his time.
Yeah.
So it's more having more intention, I think.
Of course. And, I love I love music. I love to go out. I love to see a good band or a good, DJ play or whatever. So I'm still happy to go out and I like being around people. But yeah, like if I'm just going to a hole in the ground to get wasted, like I won't do that now.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you for the conversation.
Amazing. Yeah, it's been great.
I really enjoyed it. So yeah, any final words for our listeners?
I mean, look, I guess there's an obligatory shill of Infinex. If you haven't set up Infinex, set up Infinex, set up an account. We are running this very fun fantasy trading game called Bull Run at the moment. It is worth checking out because I think it is probably the best game UX in crypto. And it's a really fun little mini game. So if you want to see the power of what Infinex can do in terms of like UX and onboarding, you really need to experience it. So just, go and create an account.
Got it. So I'll put everything, the link will be in the description below. So anyways, thank you so much, Kain.
Amazing.
I know you're busy, but
Thanks, Taiki.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
All right. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode and bye-bye.